I'm Emily, 28 years old, standing in my parents' luxurious living room, my heart pounding as I present my carefully crafted business plan. My father dismisses my $50,000 request with a contemptuous wave while my mother looks away, avoiding my eyes. In the same breath, they announce they're liquidating assets to raise $5 million for my brother Daniel's revolutionary investment opportunity. As I walk out in disbelief, I overhear my mother whispering, she must never find out the truth about Daniel's venture. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means the world to me as I share this deeply personal journey that changed my life forever. My business plan wasn't some half-baked idea scribbled on a napkin during a sleepless night. It was a comprehensive, meticulously researched proposal for a sustainable fashion boutique that would specialize in ethically sourced clothing and accessories. I had spent 3 years developing this concept, studying market trends, building relationships with fair trade suppliers, and creating detailed financial projections. The boutique would be called Conscious Threads, and it would offer beautiful, high-quality fashion items that wouldn't cost the earth, literally or figuratively. I had identified the perfect location in a growing neighborhood of Denver, secured verbal agreements with several artisans from developing countries who would supply unique handmade items, and even designed a modest but elegant interior layout. The $50,000 I was requesting wasn't just a random number, it was the exact amount needed to cover the first year's rent, inventory, and basic operating expenses until the business could become self-sustaining. I had poured my heart, soul, and savings into this venture, and I truly believed it had the potential to not only succeed financially but to make a positive impact on both the environment and the lives of the artisans who would create our products. As I stood there, my business plan clutched in my trembling hands, I couldn't help but flash back to my childhood, where this pattern of Daniel being the golden child, while my achievements were consistently minimized, had played out countless times. I remembered the science fair in 7th grade where I had won first place for my project on renewable energy sources, only to have my parents barely acknowledge it because Daniel had scored a goal in his soccer game that same day. I recalled graduating summa cum laude from university, while my parents made a brief appearance at the ceremony but left early to attend Daniel's high school graduation party planning meeting. Even when I landed my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm after graduation, their response was lukewarm at best, followed immediately by questions about whether I could help Daniel with his resume for his entry-level position at a company where he lasted barely 3 months before quitting. These memories flooded my mind as I stood in their opulent living room, surrounded by expensive artwork and furniture that cost more than my entire business proposal, feeling once again like the supporting character in my brother's story. Just then, the front door opened and Daniel sauntered in, looking smug and self-satisfied as always. At 25, he still carried himself like the high school football star he once was, despite having accomplished little since then. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced casualness that I knew was just for show. Our mother immediately brightened, her face transforming from the strained mask she'd worn while listening to my presentation to genuine warmth. "Daniel. Perfect timing. We were just discussing your investment opportunity." My father nodded enthusiastically, gesturing for Daniel to sit in the leather armchair that was positioned like a throne in the center of the room. I remained standing, feeling increasingly like an intruder in what was supposedly my childhood home. Daniel proceeded to explain his investment opportunity, in the vaguest terms possible, using buzzwords he clearly didn't understand and making grand promises about returns that were mathematically improbable. He talked about disrupting traditional markets and leveraging blockchain technology, without ever specifying exactly what his business would do or how it would generate revenue. Despite the lack of concrete details, my parents hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically and asking questions that seemed designed to make him sound brilliant rather than to actually understand the venture. "That's brilliant, son," my father said when Daniel finished his presentation, which had lasted less than 10 minutes and contained less substance than my executive summary. "We've decided to liquidate some assets to provide you with the $5 million you need to get this off the ground." $5 million. For a vague business idea with no clear plan, no market research, and no demonstrated expertise. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's when I finally spoke up, my voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Wait a minute. You're denying me $50,000 for a fully developed business plan with detailed projections and proven market demand, but you're giving Daniel $5 million for, what exactly? A vague idea with no concrete details? The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. My father's face hardened, and my mother looked away, focusing intently on a painting on the wall as if she'd never seen it before. Emily, don't be difficult, my father said, his voice cold. Daniel's opportunity has much greater potential for returns. Your boutique is a nice hobby, but his venture could make us all wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. A hobby? I repeated, incredulous. I've spent 3 years developing this business plan. I have suppliers, I have market research, I have financial projections. What does Daniel have? He has vision, my mother interjected, finally looking at me but with disappointment rather than understanding. Something you've always lacked. You're too practical, too focused on small details. Daniel thinks big. The accusation that I lacked vision was particularly hurtful, given that I had always been the practical, responsible one in the family. While Daniel was flitting from one failed venture to another, I had been building a successful career, saving money, and planning carefully for my future. This isn't about vision, I retorted, my voice growing stronger despite the tears welling in my eyes. This is about you always favoring Daniel, no matter what. He's the golden boy who can do no wrong, and I'm just the other child. My father stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. How dare you accuse us of favoritism? We've always provided for both of you equally. Daniel's opportunity is simply more promising than your little boutique. If you can't be happy for your brother's success, then perhaps you should leave. The dismissal was clear, and the unspoken threat was evident. As I walked out of the room, my business plan still clutched in my hand, I overheard my mother whispering to my father, she must never find out the truth about Daniel's venture. The words echoed in my mind as I drove home, confusion and hurt warring with a growing determination to uncover whatever secrets they were hiding. That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with the situation. My parents' reaction had been extreme, even for them. The $5 million they were planning to give Daniel represented a significant portion of their retirement savings, yet they were willing to risk it all on a vague business idea. And my mother's comment about the truth of Daniel's venture kept replaying in my mind. What truth was she referring to? What were they hiding? By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to find out exactly what Daniel was planning, not out of spite or jealousy, but because something told me this was much bigger than just another case of my parents favoring their golden son. The first person I thought to call was Jessica, my childhood friend who now worked as an investment banker in New York. We had remained close despite the distance between us, and I knew she had the expertise and resources to help me investigate Daniel's investment opportunity discreetly. I waited until I knew she would be on her lunch break before calling her, not wanting to risk anyone overhearing our conversation. Jess? It's Emily. I need your help with something sensitive. I explained the situation as briefly as possible, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice and stick to the facts. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Jessica finally spoke. This sounds serious. And potentially dangerous. Digging into family finances, especially when large sums of money are involved, can have serious consequences. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Her concern was touching, but it only strengthened my resolve. I have to know what's really going on, I told her. Something feels very wrong about all of this. After some hesitation, Jessica agreed to help, warning me again to be careful. She suggested we start by looking into the background of Daniel's business partners and any public records related to his venture. The first rule of due diligence is to follow the money, she explained. If this is legitimate, there should be a paper trail. If not, that's where we'll find the red flags. Over the next few days, Jessica sent me encrypted links to documents and databases she had access to through her firm. I spent hours poring over incorporation papers, property records, and business filings, trying to piece together what Daniel was actually planning. The initial results were concerning, to say the least. The company Daniel had registered, Future Forward Investments, had been incorporated just 2 months earlier in Delaware, a state known for its business-friendly laws and minimal disclosure requirements. The registered agent was a third-party service, making it impossible to determine who was actually behind the company without a court order. What worried me most was discovering that Daniel had been meeting regularly with a man named Richard Thompson, who had a checkered history in the financial world. A quick search revealed that Thompson had been investigated by the SEC for running a fraudulent investment scheme in the early 2000s, though he had never been formally charged due to lack of sufficient evidence. More recently, he had been associated with several high-risk ventures that had collapsed, leaving investors with substantial losses. Why would my brother, with no business experience or financial background, be associating with someone like Richard Thompson? And why were my parents so willing to fund this partnership with millions of dollars? As I continued my investigation, my parents began to ramp up the pressure on me to support Daniel's venture publicly. They invited me to a family dinner where Daniel would be presenting his business plan to extended family members, clearly expecting me to put on a happy face and pretend everything was fine. "It would mean so much to Daniel if you could be there," my mother said when she called, her voice dripping with manipulation. "He looks up to you, you know." The irony was almost laughable. Daniel had never looked up to me a day in his life. I politely declined, citing work commitments, but I knew this was just the beginning of their attempts to control the narrative and silence any potential opposition. Meanwhile, I was secretly working on my own business plan, determined not to let my parents' rejection stop me from pursuing my dream. I had been saving money for years, and while it wasn't enough to cover all my startup costs, it was a start. I spent my evenings refining my business proposal, researching alternative funding sources, and filling out loan applications. I was careful to keep all of this hidden from my family, using a personal email account they didn't know about and storing documents on a password-protected external hard drive. The process was exhausting, working full-time at my marketing job during the day, then spending nights and weekends on my boutique plans, but it also gave me a sense of purpose and control that I desperately needed in the face of my family's betrayal. My efforts to remain discreet were soon discovered, however. One evening, as I was finalizing a loan application, I received a text from Daniel that made my blood run cold. "I know what you're doing," it read. "If you continue poking around in my business or trying to start your own behind our parents' backs, I'll make sure you regret it. This is your only warning." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. How had he found out? Was he monitoring my communications? Or had someone in my circle betrayed me? The threat was clear, but it only strengthened my resolve. Whatever Daniel was hiding, I was getting closer to uncovering it, and he was getting desperate. That meant I was on the right track. The threat from Daniel should have made me more cautious, but instead, it fueled my determination to uncover the truth. I became more methodical in my investigation, taking extra precautions to cover my digital tracks and being more selective about who I shared information with. Jessica continued to be my eyes and ears in the financial world, feeding me bits of information that gradually painted a disturbing picture of Daniel's venture. The most alarming discovery came when Jessica managed to obtain redacted bank records showing that substantial sums of money had already been transferred from various accounts to Future Forward Investments. What shocked me most was seeing that some of these transfers came from a family trust that I had always believed was equally accessible to both Daniel and me, but which I now realized had been controlled solely by our parents. I decided it was time to confront my mother about these transfers, hoping that her maternal instincts might override whatever loyalty she felt toward Daniel. I arranged to meet her for coffee under the pretense of discussing an upcoming family event, planning to broach the subject gently. As we sat in the quiet corner of a local cafe, I began by asking about the family trust, framing my questions as innocent curiosity about how it was structured. Her immediate defensiveness told me everything I needed to know. "Why are you asking about this now?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "The trust has always been managed for the benefit of the entire family." I decided to be more direct, showing her the transfer information Jessica had provided. "Then can you explain why $500,000 was transferred from the trust to Daniel's company without my knowledge or consent?" The transformation in my mother's demeanor was immediate and chilling. Her face hardened, and any pretense of warmth vanished. "How did you get this information?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Have you been spying on your own family?" I tried to explain that I was simply trying to understand what was happening, but she wasn't listening. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how I was destroying the family with my jealousy and inability to be happy for Daniel's success. "You've always been this way," she said, her voice trembling with what I initially thought was emotion but soon realized was anger. "Never satisfied with what you have, always trying to tear down others instead of building yourself up. Daniel is finally doing something meaningful, and all you can do is try to sabotage him." The accusations were so baseless, so completely at odds with reality, that I could barely respond. I left the coffee shop feeling shaken and more isolated than ever, realizing that my mother was not just complicit in Daniel's scheme but an active participant. The second betrayal came just days later, and it was even more painful because it came from someone I had always considered an ally. My Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, had always seemed to understand me better than anyone else in my family. She had often been the one to defend me when my parents were being particularly unfair, and I had confided in her about my business plans and my concerns about Daniel's venture. Imagine my shock when Jessica sent me documents showing that Aunt Clara had helped Daniel set up offshore accounts to move money out of the country, effectively hiding assets that could be traced back to my parents. When I called to confront her, she didn't even deny it. "Emily, sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture," she said, her voice calm and rational. "Daniel's venture has the potential to make everyone in this family very wealthy. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve great things." The betrayal stung deeply, not just because she had helped Daniel but because she had done so while pretending to support me, even gathering information about my activities to share with him. As if these betrayals weren't enough, Daniel escalated his attacks by directly sabotaging my efforts to secure funding for my business. I had been in talks with a local bank about a small business loan, and the process had been going smoothly until suddenly it wasn't. The loan officer, who had been enthusiastic about my business plan, called to inform me that my application had been denied due to concerns about my financial history and creditworthiness. I was baffled. I had excellent credit and a stable income. Until Jessica discovered that Daniel had contacted the bank, posing as a concerned family member and providing false information about my financial stability and reliability. He had even fabricated stories about supposed gambling debts and irresponsible spending habits, painting me as a financial risk. The damage was significant. Not only had I lost the loan opportunity, but the false information Daniel had spread could affect my ability to secure financing elsewhere. This was my lowest point. I felt completely defeated, surrounded by family members who were actively working against me, and facing financial setbacks that threatened to derail my dream entirely. I spent a weekend in bed, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the ceiling, wondering if I should just give up. The emotional toll was immense, but what hurt most was the profound sense of betrayal. These weren't strangers or business competitors. They were my own family, people who were supposed to love and support me. How could they be so cruel, so willing to sacrifice my happiness and success for Daniel's questionable venture? It was Jessica who pulled me out of my despair. She called on Sunday evening, and instead of offering platitudes or sympathy, she gave me something much more valuable: information. I know things look bleak right now, but I found something that might change everything," she said. "Remember Richard Thompson, Daniel's business partner? Well, I managed to get access to some sealed court documents from his earlier fraud investigation. The evidence against him was substantial, but the case fell apart when key witnesses disappeared or changed their testimony. The documents contain detailed descriptions of his methods, and they're almost identical to what Daniel is doing now." She promised to send me the files immediately, and as we hung up, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. This was no longer just about my business or my hurt feelings. It was about exposing a potentially fraudulent scheme that could harm innocent people. Looking at the documents Jessica sent, I realized that playing by the rules wasn't going to work. My family had already shown they were willing to lie, manipulate, and sabotage me to protect Daniel and his venture. If I was going to expose the truth, I needed to fight fire with fire. I began collecting evidence systematically, saving every email, recording every conversation, where legally permissible, and documenting every instance of manipulation or sabotage. I reached out to some of Daniel's former business partners, carefully framing my questions to gather information without raising suspicion. Slowly but surely, I was building a case against him, and while I knew the confrontation would be painful, I also knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. As I delved deeper into the documents Jessica had provided, the true nature of Daniel's investment opportunity became chillingly clear. It wasn't just a questionable business venture with poor prospects, it was a sophisticated pyramid scheme designed to recruit investors with promises of high returns, using their money to pay earlier investors and create the illusion of profitability. What made it particularly insidious was that Daniel and Richard were specifically targeting elderly investors, people who had spent their lives saving for retirement and were often more trusting and less financially sophisticated. The scheme relied on emotional manipulation, using family connections and religious affiliations to build trust before convincing victims to invest their life savings. The worst part was that my parents weren't just turning a blind eye to this, evidence suggested they were actively participating, using their position in the community and their country club connections to recruit vulnerable investors. The moral dilemma I faced was overwhelming. On one hand, exposing Daniel meant destroying what was left of my family and potentially facing legal consequences for my parents. On the other hand, staying silent would make me complicit in a scheme that would inevitably ruin the lives of innocent people. I thought about the elderly couples at my parents' church, the retired teachers and firefighters who had worked their entire lives only to potentially lose everything to Daniel's greed. In the end, the choice was clear. I couldn't live with myself if I allowed this to continue, no matter the personal cost. The third betrayal came from a source I never expected, my boyfriend, Michael. We had been dating for 2 years, and I had shared everything with him, my business plans, my concerns about Daniel, even the evidence I was collecting. He had been supportive and encouraging, or so I thought. The truth was revealed when I noticed some files missing from my computer one evening. At first, I thought I might have accidentally deleted them, but as I searched more thoroughly, I realized that specific documents related to Daniel's scheme were gone. When I confronted Michael, he didn't even try to deny it. "Emily, you're going to get yourself hurt," he said, his voice pleading. "Daniel and your parents, they're not going to let you destroy this." "I was just trying to protect you." But I could see in his eyes that there was more to it. Under pressure, he finally admitted that Daniel had offered him a significant sum of money to keep tabs on me and report any evidence I might be gathering. He said it would just be until the venture got off the ground, Michael explained weakly. "Then you could have your business, and everyone would be happy." The betrayal was devastating, not just because Michael had violated my trust, but because he had done so for money. Our relationship had always been built on shared values and mutual respect, or so I believed. Now I realized that for him, those values had a price tag. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave our shared apartment, I felt not just heartbreak but a profound sense of foolishness. How could I have been so blind? The deleted files were a significant setback, as they contained some of the most damning evidence against Daniel. Without them, my case was substantially weakened, and I felt myself slipping back into despair. This was my second near defeat, the moment when I almost gave up completely. I had lost my family, my boyfriend, and crucial evidence all in the span of a few weeks. I was alone, financially strained, and facing a powerful enemy who seemed to have unlimited resources and no moral compass. I spent a sleepless night weighing my options, wondering if I should just walk away, start over in a new city, and forget about the whole mess. But as dawn broke, I realized that running away wouldn't solve anything. Daniel would continue his scheme, more people would be hurt, and I would always regret not standing up for what was right. Just when I needed it most, help arrived from an unexpected source. Jessica called early the next morning, sensing something was wrong. After I explained what had happened with Michael and the deleted files, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. I know someone who might be able to help. A forensic accountant named David. He's brilliant at recovering deleted data, and he owes me a favor." She promised to set up a meeting immediately, and by that afternoon, I was sitting in David's office, explaining my situation. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, until I finished. "Recovering deleted files is one thing," he said finally. "But what you're describing, this goes beyond simple data recovery. You're dealing with dangerous people." He agreed to help, but warned me that the process would be delicate and time-consuming. If they deleted these files properly, we're talking about deep-level recovery that could take weeks. And if they find out we're trying to recover them, they'll likely destroy the evidence permanently. Despite the risks, David began working on my computer immediately, using sophisticated software and techniques that were far beyond my understanding. While he worked, I focused on gathering new evidence, being more careful than ever to protect my information. I changed all my passwords, encrypted my communications, and even purchased a new laptop specifically for this investigation. I also started attending some of the investment seminars Daniel was hosting for potential victims, posing as a curious prospective investor. These events were masterclasses in manipulation, combining emotional appeals, misleading statistics, and high-pressure tactics to convince people to invest. What disturbed me most was seeing my parents at these events, introducing Daniel as their brilliant son, and sharing fabricated stories about his business acumen and previous successes. They had become willing participants in the fraud, their moral compass completely overridden by greed and favoritism. After weeks of careful work, David finally called with good news. "I've recovered most of the deleted files," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "And there's something you need to see. It's not just evidence of the pyramid scheme. There are encrypted communications between Daniel, Richard, and several other associates discussing how to avoid detection and what to do if the scheme collapses." This was the smoking gun I needed, concrete proof that Daniel and his partners knowingly engaged in fraudulent activity. With this evidence, I could not only expose the scheme but potentially prevent it from harming more people. The question was how to use this information most effectively. A direct confrontation would likely result in denial and attempts to discredit me, while going to the authorities without sufficient additional evidence might not lead to immediate action. I needed a plan, one that would expose the truth while protecting myself from retaliation. The recovered evidence gave me the leverage I needed, but I knew that using it would require careful planning and execution. David had warned me that Daniel and his associates were likely monitoring any digital communications, so I had to be extremely cautious about how I proceeded. After much consideration, I decided the best approach was to infiltrate their organization and gather more information directly. Using the identity of a wealthy widow from California who was looking for investment opportunities, I arranged a meeting with Richard Thompson, Daniel's business partner. Jessica helped me create a believable backstory and even set up a temporary phone number and email address with a California area code. The goal was to get Richard to talk about the scheme in detail, preferably on record, while gathering additional evidence about their operations and future plans. The meeting was arranged at a high-end restaurant in downtown Denver, a place where conversations would be private but not so private as to arouse suspicion. I arrived early, wearing a designer dress I had purchased specifically for the occasion and carrying a vintage handbag that contained a small recording device. I was nervous, my hands trembling slightly as I sipped water and waited for Richard to arrive. When he walked in, I was struck by how ordinary he looked, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, with a friendly smile and confident demeanor. Nothing about him suggested the predatory nature of his business practices. "Catherine Anderson?" he asked, extending his hand. "Richard Thompson. It's a pleasure to meet you." I introduced myself using my assumed identity, trying to project the confidence and wealth that would make me an attractive target for his scheme. The conversation began innocently enough, with Richard asking about my background and how I had heard about future forward investments. I stuck to the script Jessica and I had prepared, explaining that I had recently lost my husband and was looking for ways to invest my inheritance to secure my financial future. Richard listened attentively, nodding sympathetically at appropriate moments and skillfully steering the conversation toward his investment opportunity. He was smooth and persuasive, using emotional language and appeals to trust rather than concrete financial details. "What we offer at Future Forward isn't just an investment opportunity," he explained, leaning forward conspiratorially. It's a community of forward-thinking individuals who understand that traditional investment models are outdated. We're not just growing wealth, we're changing the paradigm of financial independence. As he continued his pitch, I carefully guided the conversation toward more specific details about the investment structure and returns. Richard was adept at avoiding direct answers, instead focusing on testimonials from satisfied investors and vague promises about future growth. It became clear that he was well practiced at deflecting questions and maintaining control of the narrative. I was beginning to worry that I wouldn't get the concrete evidence I needed when, unexpectedly, Daniel arrived at the restaurant. "Richard. I didn't know you had a meeting today," he said, approaching our table with a look of surprise that seemed genuine. "Catherine, this is my partner Daniel Thompson," Richard said smoothly, recovering quickly. "Daniel, this is Catherine Anderson, a potential investor from California." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at me, and for a moment, I feared that he might recognize me despite my disguise and changed appearance. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. If Daniel discovered my true identity, I would not only lose the opportunity to gather more evidence but could potentially face physical harm. I needed to end the meeting quickly without arousing suspicion. "I apologize, gentlemen, but I just remembered I have another appointment," I said, standing up abruptly. "Richard, it was a pleasure meeting you. I'll be in touch to schedule a follow-up meeting at my convenience." As I left the restaurant, my heart was pounding. I had managed to escape without being discovered, but I knew that Daniel's unexpected appearance had significantly increased the risk. I would need to be even more careful going forward. The danger became even more apparent the next day when my parents called, demanding that I attend a family gathering where Daniel would be presenting his venture to extended family members and potential investors. "This is important to Daniel, Emily," my mother said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We expect you to be there and to support your brother publicly." The request was clearly a test of my loyalty, and refusing would likely raise their suspicions. But attending meant putting myself in a position where I would have to pretend to support a scheme I knew was fraudulent, all while maintaining my cover story. After much deliberation, I decided to attend, reasoning that it might provide an opportunity to gather more information about their operations and future plans. The family gathering was held at my parents' home, which had been transformed into what looked like a high-end investment seminar. Charts and graphs were displayed on easels, catering staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and soft jazz music played in the background. Daniel stood at the front of the room, dressed in a tailored suit and projecting an air of confidence and success. As I watched him work the room, charming potential investors and reassuring family members, I felt a mixture of anger and admiration for his audacity. He was good at what he did, which made him all the more dangerous. The fourth betrayal came from an unexpected source: Samantha, my childhood best friend who had been a bridesmaid in my cousin's wedding and someone I had trusted implicitly. As I was standing alone near the refreshment table, trying to avoid conversation, she approached me with a concerned expression. "Emily, I'm so glad you're here," she said, taking my arm. "I've been worried about you. Your parents mentioned you've been under a lot of stress lately." Her concern seemed genuine, and I found myself opening up to her, sharing some of my feelings about being overlooked in favor of Daniel and my frustrations with my business plans. She listened sympathetically, nodding and asking appropriate questions. It was only later that I discovered her true motive. Daniel later mentioned details of our conversation that I had only shared with Samantha, making it clear that she had been spying on me for him. The betrayal was painful, not just because Samantha had violated my trust, but because she had used our long friendship as a tool to gather information for Daniel. As the evening progressed, I became increasingly aware of how sophisticated the operation was. Daniel and Richard had clearly done their homework, targeting individuals who had recently come into money through inheritances or retirement settlements. They used psychological tactics to create a sense of urgency and exclusivity, suggesting that investment opportunities were limited and that joining now would secure a position of privilege in their financial community. What was most disturbing was seeing how my parents facilitated this process, introducing Daniel to their friends and acquaintances as their brilliant son, and vouching for his integrity and business acumen. They had become willing participants in the fraud, their moral compass completely overridden by greed and favoritism. The final blow came a few days later when I returned to my apartment to find it had been broken into. At first, I didn't notice anything missing. The apartment looked much as I had left it, but as I moved to my home office, I saw that my computer had been tampered with and my external hard drive, which contained all the evidence I had collected, was gone. The break-in was professional and precise, targeting only the items related to my investigation and leaving everything else untouched. This was no random burglary, it was a targeted attack designed to destroy the evidence I had gathered against Daniel and his associates. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how much danger I was truly in. These people weren't just willing to commit financial fraud, they were willing to cross legal and moral boundaries to protect their operation. Standing in my violated apartment, I realized that the rules had changed. This was no longer just about exposing a fraudulent scheme, it was about protecting myself from people who were clearly willing to do whatever it took to protect their interests. I needed to take more drastic measures, not just to gather evidence but to ensure my own safety. The break-in had destroyed most of the physical evidence I had collected, but it had also strengthened my resolve. Daniel and his associates had shown their true colors, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. It was time to fight back, not just with evidence and information, but with a strategy that would expose them completely and protect potential victims from their predatory scheme. The break-in was a wake-up call, forcing me to acknowledge that I was dealing with people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. The stolen evidence was a significant setback, but it also clarified the stakes and strengthened my resolve. I knew that a direct confrontation would be dangerous and potentially ineffective, so I needed to devise a plan that would expose Daniel and his associates while minimizing the risk to myself. After consulting with Jessica and David, we developed a strategy to set a trap during Daniel's upcoming investor presentation, where he would be unveiling what he called Phase 2 of his investment opportunity to a room full of potential victims. The plan was ambitious and risky, requiring careful coordination and precise execution. First, I needed to create a new identity that would grant me access to the presentation without arousing suspicion. With Jessica's help, I established myself as Catherine Anderson, a wealthy widow from California who was looking to invest a substantial sum of money. We created a complete backstory, complete with a fake investment portfolio, references, and even a social media presence. The goal was to make my identity convincing enough to pass whatever background checks Daniel might conduct. David, meanwhile, worked on creating a secure digital environment where we could store any new evidence we gathered, with multiple layers of encryption and backup systems to prevent another breach. The next phase of the plan involved infiltrating Daniel's organization to gather more information about Phase 2 of his scheme. Through my Catherine Anderson identity, I arranged a meeting with Daniel, presenting myself as a serious investor who was interested in learning more about the opportunity before committing substantial funds. Daniel was immediately interested, sensing a significant commission from a high-value investment. During our meeting, he was charming and persuasive, using all the tactics I had observed at previous seminars to build trust and create a sense of exclusivity. I played the part perfectly, expressing interest while asking probing questions that would help me understand the structure of Phase 2 without arousing suspicion. What I learned was disturbing. Phase 2 was essentially an escalation of the original pyramid scheme, designed to extract even more money from existing investors while recruiting new ones. Daniel and his associates were planning to claim that the initial phase had been so successful that they were expanding their operations, offering existing investors the opportunity to increase their investments for even higher returns. They were also planning to introduce a premium tier that would require minimum investments of $100,000, targeting their wealthiest victims with promises of exclusive access and preferential treatment. The entire operation was calculated to maximize revenue before the inevitable collapse of the scheme. The fifth betrayal came when I discovered that my own father was playing a more significant role in the operation than I had realized. Through careful investigation, I learned that he was using his position at the country club to recruit elderly investors, leveraging his reputation and social standing to lend credibility to Daniel's scheme. What was particularly disturbing was that he was specifically targeting recent widows and widowers, people who were emotionally vulnerable and less likely to question a trusted member of the community. This went beyond passive complicity. My father was actively participating in the fraud, exploiting the trust of his friends and acquaintances for financial gain. As the investor presentation approached, my parents made a last-ditch effort to silence me. They invited me to dinner, where they offered me the $50,000 I had originally requested for my business if I agreed to stay silent about Daniel's activities. "We know you've been asking questions, Emily," my mother said, her voice carefully controlled. "And we're willing to support your business venture if you agree to focus on your own future and let Daniel handle his." The offer was tempting in a way. The money would allow me to start my business without further struggle. But it was also insulting. They were essentially trying to buy my silence, acknowledging that there was something to hide while attempting to bribe me into complicity. "No," I said firmly, pushing the check back across the table. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about doing what's right." My father's face hardened at my refusal, and I could see the anger in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're making a mistake that will affect the rest of your life." With the trap set and my resolve strengthened, I focused on the final preparations for the investor presentation. David had helped me create a sophisticated recording system that would capture both audio and video of the event, hidden in a designer handbag I would carry to the presentation. Jessica had arranged for several of her colleagues to attend as potential investors, providing additional eyes and ears in the room. We also prepared a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including financial records, communications between Daniel and his associates, and testimonials from victims of similar schemes, which we would release immediately after the presentation to ensure maximum impact. The night before the presentation, I barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my mind. What if something went wrong? What if Daniel discovered my true identity? What if the recording failed? The risks were significant, but so were the potential rewards. Exposing Daniel's scheme would not only protect future victims but would also bring a measure of justice to those who had already been harmed. More personally, it would be a way to reclaim my own power and agency, to refuse to be silenced or intimidated by those who had betrayed me. As dawn broke, I felt a sense of calm determination. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was ready to face it. The day of the investor presentation arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Denver sun shining brightly as if to mock the darkness of what was about to unfold. The event was being held at a luxury hotel in downtown Denver, a venue chosen to impress potential investors with an aura of success and sophistication. I arrived early, dressed in a designer suit and carrying the handbag containing the recording equipment. My heart was pounding, but I projected an air of calm confidence befitting my role as Catherine Anderson, the wealthy investor. The presentation room was set up like a high-end conference, with comfortable chairs arranged in neat rows, a stage with a large screen, and tables offering refreshments along the walls. As I took my seat in the third row, I scanned the room, noting the other attendees. Most were older, retired or nearing retirement, and many were dressed in their finest clothes, clearly treating this as a serious investment opportunity rather than a casual seminar. I recognized several faces from my parents' social circle, including friends and neighbors who had known me since childhood. The irony was painful. I was about to expose a fraudulent scheme to people who had watched me grow up, people who trusted my family implicitly. Daniel took the stage precisely at 10 o'clock, dressed impeccably and projecting an air of confidence and authority. He began with a charismatic opening, thanking everyone for coming and sharing a personal story about his journey to financial enlightenment. "I wasn't always successful," he said, his voice filled with manufactured humility. "I made mistakes, I took wrong turns, but through perseverance and a willingness to think outside the box, I discovered the principles that have led to my success." He spoke about financial freedom and breaking free from traditional investment models, using emotional language and psychological triggers to create a sense of connection with his audience. As the presentation continued, Daniel outlined the structure of Phase 2, using impressive charts and graphs to illustrate projected returns and growth potential. He explained that existing investors would have the first opportunity to participate in this new phase, creating a false sense of urgency and exclusivity. What was particularly disturbing was watching how he manipulated the emotions of his audience, sharing stories of supposed early investors who had transformed their lives through his program. "Margaret from Boulder," he said, pointing to a slide showing a smiling elderly woman. She invested $50,000 last year and has already received $80,000 in returns. She was able to take her dream vacation to Italy and help her grandchildren with their college expenses. The story was compelling, but I knew from my investigation that Margaret was likely an actor or a paid spokesperson, not a real investor. When Daniel opened the floor for questions, I knew this was my moment. I raised my hand, standing up when called upon. "Catherine Anderson," I said, using my assumed identity. "I'm impressed with your presentation, but I have some concerns about the regulatory compliance of your investment structure. The returns you're promising seem unusually high, and I'm wondering how you're able to achieve such consistent results in volatile markets." The question was carefully crafted to sound legitimate while challenging the foundation of his entire operation. Daniel handled the question with practiced ease, explaining that their proprietary investment methods allowed them to outperform traditional markets. "We're not bound by the same constraints as typical investment firms," he said smoothly. "Our innovative approach and strategic partnerships give us advantages that others simply don't have." As he continued his explanation, I reached into my handbag and activated the projector I had hidden there, connecting it to the hotel's audiovisual system. Suddenly, Daniel's presentation was replaced by images of documents and communications I had collected, showing clear evidence of fraudulent activity. The room erupted in chaos as investors realized they had been deceived. Daniel's face turned pale as he saw the evidence being displayed, but he quickly recovered, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, pointing at me. "This woman is a disgruntled family member who has been trying to sabotage my business for months. She's jealous of my success and will stop at nothing to destroy me." My parents, who were sitting in the front row, immediately came to Daniel's defense. "Emily has always been dramatic and attention-seeking," my mother said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "She's making these accusations out of jealousy toward her brother." For a moment, I hesitated, seeing the looks of confusion and doubt on some faces in the audience. But then I remembered all the people who had been harmed by this scheme, all the victims who had lost their life savings to similar frauds. I reached into my handbag again and pulled out a small remote control, pressing a button that played my secret recording of Richard Thompson admitting to the fraud. The recording was clear and damning, with Richard explicitly describing how they targeted vulnerable investors and manipulated financial records to create the illusion of profitability. As his voice filled the room, describing their methods in chilling detail, the last vestiges of doubt vanished from the faces of the audience. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several people stood up, shouting accusations at Daniel and my parents. One elderly man, who I recognized as a retired doctor from my parents' church, collapsed onto his chair, clutching his chest as he realized his life savings were gone. Hotel security rushed in as chaos erupted, with some people trying to approach the stage while others hurriedly exited the room. Through it all, I stood frozen, watching as the carefully constructed facade of Daniel's success crumbled before my eyes. My parents stared at me with expressions of shock and betrayal, as if they couldn't believe that I had actually gone through with exposing the truth. As security personnel escorted Daniel and my parents from the room, I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, satisfaction, but also a profound sense of loss. I had done what was necessary, what was right, but in doing so, I had destroyed what was left of my family. The investors, meanwhile, were left to deal with the devastating realization that they had been defrauded. Several approached me, asking for information about how to recover their money or report the fraud to authorities. I provided them with the contact information for the SEC and offered to cooperate in any investigation, knowing that the road to justice would be long and difficult for many of them. The days following the confrontation were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and emotional turmoil. Daniel was arrested along with Richard Thompson and several other associates, charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The investigation quickly expanded to include my parents, who faced charges of aiding and abetting the fraud scheme. Their assets were frozen during the investigation, including the family home and various investment accounts. The story became local news, with headlines like "Local Family Exposed in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Scheme" and "Daughter Blows Whistle on Parents' Pyramid Scheme." The media coverage was intense, with reporters camping outside my apartment and my phone ringing constantly with requests for interviews. The public reaction was mixed. Some portrayed me as a hero, a courageous whistleblower who had risked everything to expose a fraudulent scheme and protect innocent victims. Others painted me as a traitor to my family, someone who had aired dirty laundry in public and destroyed her parents' reputation for what they characterized as jealousy or revenge. The truth, as always, was more complicated. I hadn't acted out of jealousy or a desire for revenge, but out of a moral obligation to prevent further harm. Yet I couldn't deny that there was a sense of satisfaction in seeing Daniel finally face consequences for his actions, in watching as his carefully constructed facade of success and integrity crumbled under the weight of his own deceit. The emotional toll of the aftermath was significant. Despite knowing that I had done the right thing, I struggled with feelings of guilt and grief over the destruction of my family. There were moments when I wondered if there might have been another way, a path that could have exposed the truth without completely severing my familial relationships. These thoughts were particularly intense during the nights when I couldn't sleep, replaying memories of happier times and mourning the loss of what might have been. Therapy helped me process these complex emotions, providing a space to explore the conflicting feelings of justification and regret that accompanied my actions. Financially, the situation was unexpectedly positive. As a whistleblower in a financial fraud case, I was eligible for a substantial reward from the government, calculated as a percentage of the funds recovered through the investigation. When the final amount was determined, I received nearly $500,000, more than enough to fund my business and secure my financial future. The irony wasn't lost on me. The money I had originally requested from my parents to start my business, money they had refused while funding Daniel's fraudulent scheme with millions, was now available to me through the exposure of that very scheme. It felt like a form of cosmic justice, though it did little to ease the emotional pain of the situation. What surprised me most was the outpouring of support from some of the defrauded investors. Despite having lost substantial sums of money, many reached out to thank me for exposing the scheme before more damage could be done. One elderly woman, a retired teacher who had invested her entire life savings, sent me a handwritten note that read, "You may feel like you've lost your family, but you've saved many others from a similar fate. Your courage has given us a chance at justice, and for that, we are eternally grateful." These messages of appreciation helped me process the complex emotions I was experiencing, providing perspective on the broader impact of my actions beyond my personal circumstances. As the legal proceedings continued, I focused on rebuilding my life and pursuing my dream of opening a sustainable fashion boutique. With the whistleblower reward, I finally had the resources to bring my vision to life. I found a perfect location in a growing neighborhood of Denver, signed a lease, and began the process of transforming the space into what would become Conscious Threads. The work was therapeutic, giving me a sense of purpose and control that had been missing from my life during the investigation. I poured my energy into creating a beautiful, welcoming space that reflected my values of sustainability and ethical consumption, sourcing materials from fair trade suppliers and local artisans who shared my commitment to responsible business practices. The legal process was slow and emotionally draining. My parents eventually accepted a plea bargain, cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. They received probation and were ordered to pay restitution to the victims, but avoided prison time due to their cooperation and lack of direct involvement in the more egregious aspects of the fraud. Daniel, however, was not so fortunate. As the mastermind of the scheme, he received a significant prison sentence, 10 years without the possibility of parole. The sentence felt both just and sad, a reminder of how a lifetime of favoritism and entitlement had led him to this point. Throughout the legal proceedings, I maintained my distance from my family. My mother attempted to contact me several times, leaving messages that alternated between anger and regret. In one voicemail, she said, "I know we made mistakes, Emily, but we're still your family. Don't you think you've punished us enough?" The message highlighted the fundamental disconnect between us. She still saw my actions as a form of punishment rather than a moral obligation. I never responded to her messages, knowing that any attempt at reconciliation would be premature and potentially harmful to my own healing process. Part 10, Healing and New Beginnings. The journey from that fateful day in my parents' living room to where I stand today has been transformative, marked by pain, betrayal, and ultimately, growth. The initial devastation I felt after exposing my family's fraud scheme was overwhelming, a crushing weight of grief and loss that threatened to consume me entirely. There were days when I struggled to get out of bed, when the magnitude of what I had done, exposing my own brother and parents, destroying my family, felt like too much to bear. But through therapy, the support of true friends like Jessica, and the unexpected gratitude of the victims I had helped, I gradually began to heal. The healing process wasn't linear. It came in waves, with periods of relative peace punctuated by moments of intense grief and doubt. What helped most was focusing on things I could control: my business, my relationships, my own well-being. I established a routine that included regular therapy sessions, yoga practice, and time in nature, activities that grounded me and provided perspective. I also surrounded myself with people who supported my decision and understood the complexity of my situation, creating a new chosen family that filled the void left by my biological one. Opening Conscious Threads was both a practical step toward financial independence and a symbolic act of reclaiming my identity. The boutique represented everything my family's fraud scheme was not: transparent, ethical, and genuinely beneficial to others. I sourced products from artisans who were paid fair wages for their work, used sustainable materials that minimized environmental impact, and operated with complete transparency about where and how our products were made. The business wasn't just about making money, it was about creating a different kind of value, one based on integrity and mutual respect rather than exploitation and deception. The success of Conscious Threads exceeded my expectations. Within 6 months of opening, we had developed a loyal customer base and were featured in several local publications as an example of sustainable business practices. What brought me the most joy wasn't the financial success but the connections I formed with customers who shared my values. Many became friends, and the boutique became a community space where people could learn about sustainable fashion and ethical consumption. The business gave me a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement, allowing me to contribute positively to my community in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. My parents' legal consequences were relatively minor compared to Daniel's. They received probation, were ordered to pay restitution, and had to attend financial ethics courses as part of their sentence. The financial impact was significant. They lost most of their assets and had to downsize dramatically, moving from their luxurious home to a modest apartment. The last I heard, they were struggling to adjust to their new reality, their social status diminished and their reputation in tatters. I felt a pang of sympathy for them occasionally, but these feelings were always tempered by the memory of their willingness to sacrifice my well-being and that of others for Daniel's benefit. Daniel's prison sentence was severe. 10 years without the possibility of parole. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he found prison life difficult, stripped of the privileges and special treatment he had grown accustomed to. Part of me felt a sense of justice in this, knowing that he was finally facing consequences for his actions. Another part felt a profound sadness for the wasted potential and the broken relationships that had led him to this point. Our family was forever fractured, a casualty of greed, favoritism, and moral compromise. Several months after the legal proceedings concluded, I received a letter from my mother. It was a handwritten note, filled with regret and a plea for reconciliation. "I know we failed you, Emily," she wrote. "I know we favored Daniel and overlooked his faults while criticizing yours. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that someday you might find it in your heart to understand that we loved you, even if we didn't know how to show it properly." The letter was the most honest communication I had ever received from her, acknowledging the favoritism and emotional neglect that had characterized my childhood. I didn't respond immediately, instead taking time to reflect on what reconciliation might look like and whether it was possible or even desirable. Standing in my boutique today, surrounded by beautiful ethically sourced products and customers who share my values, I feel a sense of peace that seemed impossible just a year ago. The journey has been painful, but it has also been transformative, teaching me about resilience, integrity, and the importance of staying true to one's values even when it's difficult. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships but about mutual respect, support, and shared values. I've also learned that true success isn't measured by wealth or social status but by the ability to sleep at night knowing you've done the right thing. As I look toward the future, I do so with a sense of hope and possibility. The boutique is thriving, I'm surrounded by people who support and care for me, and I've built a life based on integrity and authenticity. My relationship with my biological family remains complicated, but I've made peace with the reality that some relationships cannot be repaired, and that's okay. I've created my own family, my own support system, and my own definition of success. Looking back on everything that has happened, I realize that the betrayal I experienced was ultimately a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. It forced me to examine my values, to stand up for what was right, and to build a life based on authenticity rather than approval. The pain was real and sometimes overwhelming, but it led me to a place of strength and self-awareness that I might not have reached otherwise. I've learned that sometimes the most difficult experiences are also the most transformative, that our greatest challenges can become our greatest teachers if we're willing to learn from them. Family doesn't always mean blood, and sometimes the hardest battles are against those who should love us most. But in standing up for truth and justice, I found my true family and my true self. I want to thank you for listening to my story today. If you've experienced similar betrayal or abuse, know that you're not alone. There is hope, there is help, and there is healing waiting for you. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up against family members who wronged you? How did you navigate that difficult situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might just inspire someone else who's going through a similar experience. If you found value in this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and recovery. And consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, no matter what you're going through, you are stronger than you think, and you deserve to be treated with love and respect. Wishing you peace, healing, and justice on your journey.